So, welcome to Leeds Sharp release number 97. We thought we'd adopt the Christmas panel show format again because it's more relaxed. I'm Matt Ross. I'm a .NET developer. I work for Tronic.
I'm Richard Garside. I'm a .NET developer too, and I work for a company called Looking For.
I'm Kieran McIntyre. I'm a .NET developer.
You
I work
surprised.
for Digby Swift.
I'm John Staveley. I'm a .NET contractor, and I work for whoever pays.
Nice.
So this is release number 97. Like I said, we're 3 away from number 100. I mean, maybe we should do something special for 100.
It should be a cake with 100 candles.
Definitely
on it.
Cake.
Bill
knows
Gates
cakes?
bursting out of a cake or something like that.
I'm sure he'd be up for that.
So in our attempt to make this more of a sort of a show, you know, obviously leaning on .NET Rocks, we've come up with some old and new sections. So our current format is the intro, which we're in right now, and then we'll do Kaizen Bits, which is just little bits that make you a better developer, generally speaking. So it could be a book, could be I don't know, new features of a language. Nudge, nudge.
Yes, yeah. So a feature from C# that's coming out we're covering today.
Yeah, cool. And then our brand new section called Design Pattern Recognition rolls off the tongue beautifully, doesn't it? But no, you know, design patterns. You know, who knows them? You know, knows about them, yes. But you know, do you really sit there and go over them? Practice design patterns every day? No. So we thought we'd. All right, okay. We thought we'd reiterate a design pattern every month to give you a little bit of extra value and make it worth your while.
Yeah. So some of them are going to be really basic.
Yeah.
Like real run-of-the-mill stuff that is kind of 101, but others are going to be maybe occasional fringe case design patterns. But hopefully there'll always be something to take away.
Yeah. And then we'll launch into the main talk, which is going to be about login and metrics, honeycomb, I'm told, mostly.
Yeah.
Cool.
And then we'll go to the pub.
Yes, join us for a drink.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I don't want to add anything.
So
can I just
yeah,
say,
go on.
just talking about the Kaizen bits, if anybody has any suggestions for future Kaizen bits, things that they think make your life easier or you a better developer, let us know, and we'll you know, either you come up and tell everybody about it, or we'll just do a bit of reading around and tell everybody about it for you.
Everyone can talk for 5 minutes about that cool library that they found that really makes their life easier.
Yeah,
so
it's cool.
suggestions, please.
Yeah.
And you know, check it out. You're relaxed. You're seated. It's all good. It's not standing up in front of strangers. You know, we're all .NET developers.
We could even put up a screen. You could stand behind a screen if you wanted.
So I got a bit of industry news that's hot off the press.
Nice.
Yeah. So that's just been announced on the 25th. So what's that? 3 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
So Microsoft is to democratize homomorphic encryption with Seal for .NET. Anyone know what Seal is? Anyone know what homomorphic encryption is? So
Are they in the Avengers?
it sounds like it, doesn't it? So so first of all, homomorphic encryption is
On the other side.
is a method of performing calculations on on encrypted information without decrypting it. You'll like this, John. It's like right up your street,
Yeah,
isn't it?
that's good.
So you know the problem is, you know, more and more stuff is getting stored in the cloud. If you want to do anything meaningful with it, with all the data protection stuff and stuff going on, at some point you're going to have to decrypt it. And so this method addresses that. So you don't need to decrypt it. Basically, you can perform operations on it. Now it's still a bit off. So it's you know, if you use it on email, for example, it slows it down. It's 1,000,000 times slower to use. So that's like a no. Unless you want to tell your employer that you're using homomorphic encryption, and that's why it's taking so long. But anyway, so Microsoft have announced Seal made that open source last December, and they've looks like they've done a .NET wrapper around all this technology, and they've just released that, and also some useful examples for developers to get started on that stuff. So you know, it's not sort of like a fringe technology. Apparently, lots of companies have adopted it already. Where is this? In addition to the new .NET Live Microsoft, I had it somewhere, but lots of companies are adopting it, and it's written in. Any guesses?
C++.
Yay!
Yeah.
Without external dependencies.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
So if you want to get stuck into that, Microsoft Seal for .NET comes as part of Microsoft Seal version 3.2.0, and it was released today, which was 3 days ago. So yeah, there you go. That's my piece of industry news.
Can I just jump in with a? It's not so much news, but talking of languages and things being written in it. I had some spare time recently, and I thought I'd look at, spreading my wings, looking at some new technology, and I picked up Flutter by Google. Has anybody else looked at Flutter? It's okay. So Flutter is a framework for building native apps. So you can just with a single language, that'll compile down to both Android and iOS. So you can build native apps just with one single language, and it'll compile down, rather than it being a hybrid, say with PhoneGap. So it's quite similar to what Xamarin offers, but this is Google's offering. And one of the beauties is that it uses Dart as a language. Has anybody looked at Dart? Now, I'm the turning circle of a barge when it comes to learning languages. So the idea of actually picking up a new language was completely, not going to happen. And someone recommended I look at Dart with Flutter. You wouldn't believe how similar Dart is to C#. It's incredible. You could look at a page of Dart and just think it was C#.
Has it got semicolons?
It's yeah, it is. I mean, a lot of this, so much of the syntax.
Don't like all this indented and.
So much of it is completely identical. The syntax, straight. I mean, even down to the null coalescing, the use of string interpolation is very, very similar. I mean, it's been heavily based on Java and C#, but obviously taking all the really good bits. So if you wanted to have a look at something new, and you didn't
too new.
But not too new. But you didn't want to spend so much time, looking through all the documentation to learn a new language. Dart is fantastic, and you can use Dart for web apps. It's got its own frameworks. It's got its own package environment that you can look at. So it's really worth a look. I'd really recommend it. You can be really productive really quickly.
Cool.
I guess there's a release candidate of Visual Studio 2019 came out today.
I'll be mentioning that.
It's nice and purple.
It's purple. All right. Well.
Anyone going to DDD North?
Good
Anyone
on you.
speaking at DDD North? Yeah,
Same
okay.
people probably.
So DDD North, really great developer conference. It's free. It's in Hull this year. Some of it's in Bradford, Leeds, Sunderland, Newcastle. But it's in Hull, so it's not far away. If there were some tickets a few days ago, so there may still be some now. I'd recommend going. You get some great talks.
There's some free tickets.
Other than me, yeah, they're all still available. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I think so. Yeah, because it usually sells out really quickly.
I think the newness of the whole.
Maybe it's the whole thing. I'm not sure. But if you can't go this year, go next year, wherever it is.
Wow.
It's worth enduring Hull for.
Yeah.
And with that, we launch into our section Kaizen Bits.
Okay. This is beautiful music.
Right, it's all kind of
I feel like we need lights for spotlights.
So first first of all, I'd like to talk about my socks. So apparently Azure DevOps needs a mascot. So this is the new mascot for Azure DevOps, and they're trialing it in the UK only.
You have Azure DevOps socks.
I have Azure DevOps socks.
Did you have the socks before it became the logo?
So when I was in NDC, I picked up a pair of these, and the marketing lady said, "You're probably a great developer, but don't become a sock model because you stumble everywhere." So I also saw a really good talk on non-nullable reference types in C#8 by Matt Torbenson. So he spoke on this for about a couple of hours. I'm going to summarise this in 3 minutes.
Woohoo!
So can I have a clicker rather than saying click?
No, we like when you say click.
Click is good.
Click.
Then you can listen to
Matt,
music.
can you lean back, please?
Oh, sorry.
Right, so we've been dealing with nulls for a very long time. Tony Hoare once coined the expression, because he invented nulls, apparently, was it his $1 billion mistake? And QCon 2009 click. So the null reference type is that innumerable errors, vulnerabilities, system crashes, which probably cost $1 billion of pain and damage in the last 40 years. So that's a lot of true. I mean, it's very true. There's a lot of times where you get the click object not net set to an instance of an object error. So this my func works when I pass in a log that's instantiated, but if I pass in something else, log.message calls, the most annoying error ever created. If it just said object of log not created, set to an instant object, that would be more useful, but it's just basically something's gone wrong somewhere. So it's a very frustrating problem to deal with. So Tony Hoare called it his $1 billion mistake. Click. So what we spend a lot of time doing is this, null reference checking, or you've got the question mark after log question mark dot message to deal with all those null reference issues. Click. So what we have, and what you spend over an hour about talking about is how we might deal with it, how we dealt with it in C#, how they dealt with it in Haskell and other various functional languages. And then how we decided to deal with it in C# and what's coming in the next version of Visual Studio. So click. So we have click, the old way of creating a null reference type. So string s equals null. So we're quite used to the fact that s can be nullable or not null. Click. And then we've got the new way click. So now in C#8 you will have to actually declare that string as nullable. So click. If you want a nullable string, you do use the question mark operator, as we do with all reference types now. And if you want a non-nullable string, you just do string s. And then you can't set a null. That will generate a compiler warning. Click. So this one here, that's a non-nullable string because I haven't used the question mark operator and I've set it to null. So that's a compiler warning. It's saying you're doing something wrong there. And that one also. So I could have passed in a null log reference type. So that will tell me at design time, which is what I want to know, I'm doing something stupid. Click. So the quicker amongst you, obviously I wasn't one of those, will go, well, hang on a sec, there's times I know that I'm going to be passing in something that's not null. And then you use something called the null ignoring or null forgiving operator. Click. So for some reason, this is one of the examples. So even if you've set bar is not null or empty, this will cause one of those null warnings because it thinks that bar, when you call bar.length, could actually be a null operator. And there's plenty of other instances, but that's one of the most confusing instances. Click. Yeah, so you get that error warning. Click. So if you see there, bar, exclamation mark, which is, I know this isn't null, stop warning me about it. So apparently this warning becomes so frequent that they've created an entirely new operator for it. Click. Click. Okay, so I think what this is going to lead to, and is explicitly setting your reference types correctly, will lead to fewer runtime errors and better design. So better design, you're explicitly saying this is going to be nullable, this is going to be non-nullable, and that's all reference types, not just strings. Click. So controversially, when you do file new project on C#8, this is on by default. So if you want a nullable string, it's going to be string question mark from now on. And in the CS Podge, that property controls it. Nullable context options enables. That sets it up for the entire project. Now you're going, well, okay, that's fine for new projects, but I might want to do some of this in code I've got already, and I want to port it to this new way of working. So click. In which case you can use these compiler directives. So you can switch on for classes or method bodies or particular bits of code that you want. Click. And then for existing NuGet packages that aren't compliant to C#8, you've got a sidecar pattern. So basically it's a text file that says all of these APIs, these strings are nullable, these are non-nullable, reference types nullable, non-nullable. So you can very easily port NuGet packages to the non-nullable reference types pattern. Click. What and when? Click. So Visual Studio 2019, which is currently in preview, version 16 preview 1, has this. So you want to download a new copy, you can start playing with today. Click. And then there's a load of other features that are coming. So you can watch this on GitHub, the status of these new features and whether they make it into the framework or not. Click. And see everything else that's coming in C#8, click. And that's all I had to say. Is there any questions? See, that was 2 hours at NEC. You just saved you 2 hours of it.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So, a simple one first. If I just do string C, yeah, and then without doing anything else, check if it's null or empty, will it be? It's obviously not null because it's not nullable.
Yeah.
But will it be empty?
Presumably at that point it's not initialized.
Yeah, it would be a zero-length string.
So it will be empty.
Yeah.
So it will still class as null or empty. Yeah.
Well, if you've got
empty.
In the old way of doing things, when you initialize you create a string, it will be null by default. So in a non-nullable string, it will be empty by default.
Empty. Yeah. Cool.
Okay. So it's a brave new world. Going to play.
All right. Are there any more questions? If not, it's time for design pattern recognition.
That's me. So I'm going to talk about PRG, post redirect get. Now this isn't so much as a programming pattern as it is a web pattern, a design pattern that is, it should be standard. It should be baked into every single web developer's toolkit, but it isn't. And we're just going to talk about what it is, why it is what it is, and how to fix it, and how to progress. Click. So what's the problem? You know the scenario where you'll be on a website, you'll post a form, and then if you hit refresh, the alert box will come up and it'll say, oh, do you want to repost the information? Or if you post a form, it takes you to the next page, you navigate away from the page, you click back, and you get the same pop-up. It says, so maybe you've submitted an order, you get the thank you page, it gives you the order number, you go off that page, you go, oh, crap, what was the order number? You click back, and you get that box because the page you went to was the result of a submitted form. So this is really bad. It's bad for users because users, visitors to a website don't want to have to deal with that box that's popping up. It's intrusive and it creates a very messy UX.
Especially when you're paying for something.
Well, yeah, exactly. It doesn't feel professional for a website.
Yes.
Almost always in the back end there's code repetition. Always code repetition in these kind of scenarios. If you look at what's happening, you go back to a classic ASP site where the same page is handling the post of itself, and you've just got if statements handling, whether a flag was set, and it's spaghetti horribleness, and then just as I said, unnecessary code complexity. So it's classic ASP is the example. But if you look at an awful lot of web forms and MVC, you'll see exactly the same happening. Click. So this is it. This is just a diagram that I pulled from Wikipedia, which perfectly explains it. User submits it. A post is submitted to the server, and ordinarily a 200 success response is sent back to the browser, which means that the user can just refresh the page and essentially just redoing the post. And if they go off the page and come back to it, they can do exactly the same. So if you think of the scenario that someone might submit an order through a form, the person hits refresh, it's feasible that they could be actually resubmitting the same order if you don't have the conditions in place to catch that kind of scenario. So it's quite dangerous as far as your web apps go. Click.
Yeah, you get it's a classic example is someone completes an order, then bookmarks the page, and then goes back to that page just to make sure that the order's all right.
Yeah, exactly. So this is some code I just whipped up in MVC just to explain the scenario, and you will have seen this. Everybody who's worked in an MVC web app will have seen exactly this code. Not exactly this code, but this format. So you've got the get request, which essentially just builds all the model and then returns that model into the view. And then the view posts to a post request, which checks whether the model is valid, and if it's valid, it just returns a view, a success view or something. And if it's not valid, then it basically repeats what the get is doing, builds the model, and then returns the view, which the get does. Code repetition, and you're just proliferating this ability for the user to hit refresh and get the same message. And you can see if the logic isn't correct, where I've got the do work here, it's entirely possible that you could be writing additional stuff to the database, sending duplicate emails, creating duplicate orders. Click. So what we really want to do is this, and this is PRG, post redirect get, where you have the get request doing what it did before, but the post just checks whether it's valid, still does the work if it needs to, but if it's valid, it does a redirect to a separate action, and if it isn't valid, it redirects back to the get. Okay? That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Does that mean that you don't get that message in the browser anymore?
Exactly.
Oh, right.
Because what you're doing is you're not sending a 200 request down to the user browser, you're sending a 302 down to the browser. So there is a little overhead, there is a little bit of latency, but we're talking minimal. So it sends a 301 down to the browser then knows to then perform another get on the original page. Has anybody worked with, presumably you've all seen the first example. Who uses this approach? Brilliant. Okay, so you will know, presumably then, what the problem I'm about to tell you with this approach is.
Errors.
Exactly. So
what was it?
Model state.
Model state.
Yeah, because in the post, you get the model state. It tells you whether your model that you're posting is valid or not. As soon as you redirect back to your get, you lose your model state. So it's one of the reasons why people don't tend to use this in MVC, because there's a technical hurdle to actually pull down the model state back into the get. Click. So the solution for it, well, the solution I use for it is On the post, I export the invalid model state to temp data. On the get, I import the model state from the temp data. And I do all this using action filters. So if you know you're going to have a get in the post, you just put an attribute alongside that, alongside the get and the post. And then I perform the export and the import. This is the clever bit. And I say it's clever bit. I didn't invent this. This is Stack Overflow goodness. But I perform the export and the import on the action executed event. So on the post, what you're doing is you're waiting for the action to have been executed. At that point, you collect the model state if it's invalid. And on the get, you wait until the get has actually been executed, and then you merge the invalid model state with the model state that is actually being pushed down to the view, which is the perfect time to do it. You don't want to do it before it's been executed, because it might be overwritten by things you're doing in the view. Click. So we'll put this on the meter page, but this is it. This is the code for exporting and importing the model state. So it's all we're doing is the first one is exporting it. So we're just checking whether the model state is valid. If it's not, and the result is a redirect result, the two states that we want to meet, we just set the temp data to the model state. And then in the import it, we check whether the result that we're passing down to is a view result, which is fairly obvious, and we just merge the model state. It's really, really straightforward. Okay, does anybody use this technique? Can I just ask how many people actually handle the model state, how you handle the model state?
Yeah, we've done one where we use a model builder class that works in both the get request and the post request.
Okay.
But on the post request, you have to say basically ignore stuff that the user's posted. So it will do the same thing. It will build up like your lists and your drop downs and all the static data that you need.
Okay.
And that's where we handle it. So it avoids that code duplication step that you had in your get and your post, and just obviously locate it in one place.
Cool.
That seems to be quite a lot for us.
Nice. How do you do it?
It's been a while.
Okay. So there is a caveat here. This is MVC 5. In MVC 6, on .NET Core, you can't serialize the model state. So if you tried to add the model state to the temp data, it won't let you do it. So what you've got to do is you've got to serialize. You've got to essentially run link over the model state, serialize that, and then add that to the temp data, and then deserialize it. Do it all in reverse. But if you look that up,
Another potential little caveat is if you're, let's say you're in Azure or in a sort of load balanced situation, and you don't have, is it session affinity or something like that it's called?
Yeah, AIR.
Yeah. Switched on, then you run the risk of losing that temp data.
It's a really good point, and we came across this with the project we were working on recently, where because we're using temp data is session based. So if you're running on a load balanced site, or like Azure where you've got instances, if you don't have sticky sessions enabled, then this won't work. So it's worth noting.
It does seem a really bad word, like reason to use session state though, just to store the model state.
Yeah.
Because then you're creating another dependency on something else, and then if you want to scale that out, then you've got to use Redis and stuff like that. So you're just building a lot of.
Well, you could argue that Redis would be.
You should be using Redis in the first place.
Yeah, but you don't. For this
in the first place.
Yeah, why are you coupling yourself to the session object? Everybody moved away from the session object like 10 years ago.
I specialize
because like I've seen the similar patterns bits for temp data, but storing it in cookies instead.
Yeah.
So instead of like using whatever temp data provider it is to store it in session, people have providers to store it in the cookie instead. But then you get another problem of having massive cookies.
Yeah.
So the payload going backwards and forwards across the wires is always huge.
Yeah.
I think I'm of the opinion that you should keep cookies as lean as possible. To be honest, and I know everyone moved away from session, but I think it's got a bit of a bad rep. I think all the problems that it had when everyone moved away have sort of
I guess it depends
dissolved a
on
little bit.
But this is one of
There's
the
nothing wrong with using session, I think.
This is like one of the problems. Everybody just seems to throw everything into the session data because it's easy,
Yeah.
and I think that's where like using the session for everything became really bad because everybody just threw like caching objects, everything into session, and then it became this big massive thing where you have to carry around with you all the time.
I've seen 100 mega objects
Yeah.
in a session.
Well, you're talking about abuse of the session,
Yes.
which is not a reason for not using it. You know?
No.
Well, maybe that's another design pattern. Maybe we should do an anti. Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, you're right. Over reliance on session is never going to be a good thing. I mean, this absolutely fine for what you need to do.
Yeah.
I would love. I mean, like your model builder. I mean, it's why I asked. If you've got if the pattern can be replicated, because the pattern is a good pattern. It cleans your code. It keeps things very, very root focused, so you know what's happening in your code. But it'd be great to know of some different approaches to actually handling, the model state transition. So
Yeah, I can't remember how I used to do it.
well, dig out the code where you have used it, and we'll open up a discussion about it, because it'll be great to see that. Yeah. Cool.
Cool.
Great,
Great.
thanks. All right. Well, we'll be moving on to our main guest, and you want to.
So I was doing a talk on security at the Manchester user group. That's where I met Martin, and I've since bumped into NDC every year since. Martin did.
when you were both hanging out with Scott Hanselman.
Well, Martin knows him better than I do. Martin was selecting the speakers at NDC this year. I don't know how you wrangled that gig, but I'm sure they'll pay him back with free flights to NDC Sydney or something like that.
All the organiser lots of beers.
Very good guy, very knowledgeable. Feel free to argue with him a lot. He really enjoys that part of the presentation. We should have a fantastic presentation.
Yeah. So you're vice president of engineering at Manchester Airport.
That's me, yes.
Yes.
License.
I saw on your LinkedIn page that hiring exclamation mark. Is that still the case, or is that out of date now?
That's been there for about 10 years. Pretty much every company I go to, I build teams, and always open to hiring people who are awesome. So I always make space for people who are awesome.
And you have Leeds offices as well, don't you?
We recently purchased a company not too far away from here, and yeah, we do have
An amazing company, sorry.
I won't go that far. The company is, I mean, the developers are
Average, thoroughly average.
All right. Well, we're going to take a short break to move everything around and get everything set up. So grab yourself another beer, and then we'll go into the main talk.
Chairs outside.
Yeah.
Chairs outside.
of my little bell there. But yes, I am VP of Engineering at Mago, engineering function at Manchester Airport Group. They do pay for me to come to these things, so I do have to mention that. And yes, we are hiring if you want to trek for 2.5 hours to come and see us. But anyway, that's that done. You can find me on Twitter, which is where I spend most of my time. And I have a blog which is mainly just rants, so do be warned and do not complain. So what I'm going to talk about today is 3 things: logging, metrics, and events. Now they form a sort of movement at the moment. You might have seen Ollie or O11Y. It's all around observability, the idea of being able to see into your applications. And it's something that is kind of lost with a lot of development these days. It's kind of the afterthought. I think my abstract says it's the less sexy part of development is writing logins and metrics. And let's just say those people, they don't know what they're talking about. It is awesome. Have you not seen some of the graphs? So what people don't realize is how easy it is to do. How easy it is to add a few lines of code and be able to get some really interesting information out of your application. So there are 3 distinct things. So we're going to tackle them one by one. So just as a bit of agenda, because I'm a manager, so I do meetings and they have to have agendas now. So metrics, logging, events and tracing. I'll come on to events and tracing because they are a little bit of an interesting term at the moment. There's quite a few people who've not quite put a term on what they are. We know what they're useful for, but we haven't put a term on it because events has a connotation that is not what we mean. So yeah, logging. Now you'll notice that this is in the opposite order because the last time I did it, it actually felt like this was a better order, because the reason I think logging is the first one we should tackle is logging is what everybody does. So first thing people do, let's throw something like Log4net on there. We'll throw all our logs into disk, and then we'll fill up the disk, and then we'll get alerts to say our disk is full at the end of the day. And we'll say that we're doing things that are good because we've got logging in our application, and we can go back and have a look. Which is all well and good when you've got one application running on one server and not in a load balance cluster with Redis backing your session state because you're an idiot. There may be a theme going throughout this presentation. We're going to use view state as well, just to throw that out there. So logging itself is it's meant to be text-based. It's meant to be human readable. The consumer of logs is you as a developer, as an operations person. They are meant to be like that. Now, what's sort of come up recently, and by recently I mean sort of the last sort of 5 years, which may not be recent in technology terms, but is structured logging. And structured logging kind of makes logging palatable because it's the idea of adding context, adding metadata onto these logs. So it's not just a human readable thing. It's still wrong to do it, don't get me wrong, but it does make it bearable. Logging itself, as you can see some examples on there, the person called this at this time with these parameters. Great, thanks, that's really going to help me. Because yeah, they called it, that's awesome. But I knew that they called it because they actually rang me up and said that this wasn't working. That doesn't help me. Okay, well I've turned on debug. So your 4 different error states, which is something's catastrophic has gone wrong and fill my hard disk. Those are the different levels of logging that you have. Now you turn that on and all of a sudden you've got 40,000 log entries, half of which are from your frameworks and the other half of which have been put in there because you were debugging something at some point in the last 10 years and they're no longer relevant. You're probably getting across that I don't like logs. You would be correct. If you do need to do it, always do structured logging. Because the idea is if you've got person X, what you want is you want to be able to maybe search on that X. Now, you can throw these things through things like Logstash and things like that to gain some bits of information out of it. But what you're actually doing there is you're trying to reverse engineer something that wasn't meant to do that. So all of a sudden somebody changes that error message of person X and they say persons X and all of a sudden all your regex goes. So it isn't meant for that purpose. But if you add in structured logging, you do have the ability to do that. Now, you'll have probably seen some technologies about there. So you have got Serilog, which on my first presentation I had no idea what that logo actually means, but the creator of Serilog got in touch and told me exactly what it means. Apparently it's loosely following a thread through your application, which is kind of poetic.
Can I just inject that Stackify is one of our sponsors?
I actually really like Stackify. Of the APM tools, it is the best. Yes, I may or may not know that.
That's our Christmas party sorted.
So, and I do actually have some developers against humanity cards if anyone wants to play later. So, of the APM tools, it is the best. And they do provide some useful information. Let's just say they're not New Relic. Hopefully they're not one of your sponsors. So there are other providers which are mainly around just logs. So you've got things like Splunk, Logs.io, Datadog. If you really want to give away your firstborn, then go with one of those. Log4net, I'm pretty sure most people here will have heard of Log4net. Lots and lots of nods, yeah, good. Nlog, which was, it kind of came after Log4net and did some things with structured logging and that kind of stuff, but in the web forms world nobody really wanted to do this kind of thing, so it was kind of before its time, if you like. The logo on the corner there is CloudWatch. I'm an AWS guy, I know Azure is Microsoft, and that's apparently it's some cloud thing they're doing, but AWS rules. But there are lots and lots of ways to ingest these logs and provide some ability to query them. I advise that you don't write them to disk, ever, because when you start to work on an application that works at scale, you're going to need some way of centralizing this information. So Serilog, there's a tool called GetSec, which is a hosted tool off the back of it. Even things like Splunk will ingest these logs and will ingest these structured logs as well. And we're going to talk about Serilog because that is one of the easiest tools to get logging out. Now, one thing that Microsoft have done with the new frameworks is they baked logging in. Now, it used to be that you do Log4net and you put Log4net in, you'd have to make that decision really, really far up your decision-making processing, because every single class that you need to put in would need to reference nlog or Log4net. And that made it very hard for things like framework authors. It made it hard for you to really plow ahead with development, because you had to make all these decisions up front. And if you didn't, you then had to do this big find and replace, and the syntax wasn't quite the same. And then you had to do regex, and regex is awful. There's only about 5 people in the world that know it. So it just became a pain. So what they did is they baked in iLogger and iLogger-T. I normally have my generic t-shirt on, so there's a joke around there, but I haven't because honeycomb. But they've created this inside of the framework. Now what that means is you can just go about adding logging all over your application and not worry about how you're going to ingest it, not worry about whether you're going to sign up your firstborn and then go with Splunk, or you're going to use something like Serilog or use something like Elasticsearch. You don't have to make those decisions until you have to make them, until you're going into production, until you're going into scale. And you can change those decisions because it's all built into the application. And it's easy, it's really easy. With dependency injection and the way that everything is dependency injected now in the .NET framework, you can literally just add iLogger of your class at the top of your class, inject it, and the logging frameworks inside of .NET Core will just add it. Now, I do only talk about .NET Core here. There are probably ways to do it in that older stuff, but I don't think there's anybody who uses that anymore. Other than, obviously, the people who are using session state. So...
Not making friends.
I'm not from round there, I don't care. But it's library agnostic. It also supports structured logging, providing the destination framework supports it as well. But as you can see, it is that simple to add some logging to your application. It's also that simple to overuse logging. So you have to start thinking about why you would want to use it. So if you're catching an exception and you don't really care that you know that that exception is there, just don't log it. You don't need to. Don't create noise. So Serilog, which is the one that we're going to talk about, By default, when you turn on a .NET New MVC project, as you'll see, you get console login. If you add Serilog, you can start adding other destinations for those logs. It does change a bit, but obviously, as you can see there, the Elasticsearch, writing to Elasticsearch with structured logging will extract every bit of information that you've put in there. So if you go back to what we were talking about here, where we've got person X, call the function with these parameters. Now what you can do is you can, with structured logging, add in X as a parameter. You can add in the parameters as different structured logging parameters. And then when it comes up to Elasticsearch, because you've added Elasticsearch in there, it's going to separate out as different things that you can query, you can filter, you can provide alerts. Again, you shouldn't do that, but you can. So I'm going to do a very quick demo. Hopefully it will work. Now what I will say is the Elasticsearch stuff isn't working at the moment, and I don't know why. It was working last night, but it isn't today. So show you how to do it and show you how powerful it is. I'm not going to run any cloud services or anything like that with this. So the idea is, and if you are playing around with this, I do recommend that you learn a little bit of Docker, get it up locally, and run yourself a little Docker Compose script. So this is going to run up a Elasticsearch cluster, which doesn't work, a Kibana, which is the graphing stuff in the front of it, and then it's going to put on things like Influx and Grafana and that kind of stuff. And it just runs me up basically a stack that we can work with locally. Obviously, in production mode, you wouldn't use this, or you might do in a Kubernetes cluster, but it does give you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish.
Are we supposed to see code or anything?
Not yet. The other thing I'd say, always run it in interactive mode because it's lots of text and it makes you look like a real developer. Right, so now what you will see is, if you are right at the front, you will see what I'm doing, but otherwise just trust the people at the front. There's no magic here. I've literally created a directory, .NET New MVC, create myself a little MVC application.
You can just tell us that you write it.
Yeah. Just trust me, this is awesome.
Yeah, I can see it.
I can't see.
Right. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So, can everybody at the back see that? Enough to get a picture of what we're doing? Or do I need to go a little bit? Is that, yeah? Yeah.
Now, still can't see it.
And now I can't get back. Okay. Somewhere around there. It'll give you an idea anyway. But this is a basic template of a solution that I've just literally done .NET New. So just to prove, I know I don't have any sleeves, so I don't have anything up my sleeves, but okay, so basic website, you can see logging in there, it's throwing some logs out there, nothing special. So, adding Serilog. Now, I am cheating slightly, I am not going to type all of this in, I am going to use some snippets, like that. But there's nothing special here. It's not. And like that. So that is Serilog added. So now I've got structured logging in my application. Obviously, as you will understand, that is incredibly hard. Please do wear hard hats while doing this. It is very dangerous. Now what you will notice is the logging has slightly changed in the console because now we've got a different provider. I've changed the default logging provider. I apologize that goes really bright from a sort of white background to a proper developer tool because it's black. Sorry, that is bugging the hell out of me. Right, there we go. Doesn't make any difference to anybody unless you're a proper programmer. So you'll see that has changed slightly in the background there. Now, the important things that you can see here is where you've got the blue. Now that's actually structured logging coming into play there. Because what it's doing is you've still got this human readable aspect that you would want to see and you want to throw up on the screen so it makes your manager look like you're actually doing some work. But you've also got this blue bit, and now that's an extracted parameter as part of the structured logging. Now if you've got a tool that's going to take this structured logging like Elasticsearch, what you'll be able to see is that that's a path parameter. That's something that you're going to be able to filter on. Now obviously as static files, I'd say you're probably not going to do that, but when it comes to things like routes, you'll be able to use that to be able to filter on who's accessed the home page, who's accessed a particular page. Because you'll see executing action. It's giving you the class. That's something that you can filter on. And all that's just from however many lines of code there. It's not exactly complicated. Now if you wanted to then say add a different provider. Now, as you can see, in the application I've not really done anything. I've not made a decision when I created the application what login provider I was going to use. Now I could have done that. I could have removed the Serilog on there, and then I can go into my home controller. I can do I nearly did that without one mistake, and now it's just all gone to people say I'm actually being more verbose than I need to be with modifiers and stuff, but they're wrong. People say I'm arrogant. I just say I'm right.
Can't imagine that.
So that is not a Serilog logger. That is just a logger. Don't you love the stop-start of .NET Core being not, let's shut down Visual Studio because I've changed something. So fast.
You must be the sixth speaker that uses VS Code now. It's now officially uncool to use Visual Studio.
Was it ever cool to use Visual Studio? So as you can see, that's my log message. It has gone through Serilog. But I can quite easily go into this program here, remove any Serilog references whatsoever. Okay, I'll do it properly. And you'll see the logging returns back to the way it was before. If I scroll back up here, you should see an information line there saying this is log message. That's not Serilog.
So
And
can I
that
ask
is.
a stupid question. Is it Serilog that provides a structured logging?
So Serilog provides what they call the deconstructing elements of this is my log message and I'm going to deconstruct the elements of it. I'm going to write the log message, but I'm also going to write these other things as well. And I'm going to create some big JSON object that contains all of that information. So out of the box, they don't support structured logging, but they do support a common interface that is compatible with structured logging.
So
it's
if I
all
want
different.
structured logging, I'll add Serilog.
Serilog, or there are a number of other providers, and true BBC format, other structured logging providers do exist. Now, I'm doing that to console. I've not really got any more benefit out of this at all right now, because I'm still logging into the console. However, that's as simple as it is to start writing stuff to Elasticsearch. Obviously, you would need my snippet to make it that easy, but it's not exactly complicated. And that will log it to Elasticsearch if Elasticsearch was working, but it's not, and I don't know why, so we're not going to waste time on that. But you've then got that idea that you can filter, you can, if you've ever used Elasticsearch, it does provide drilling and all that kind of stuff. It provides the ability to do graphs, buckets, group bys, all of that good stuff. There is a SQL provider. If you're that way inclined, you can push it into SQL, you can push it into Splunk, you can push it into lots of other things. Now, that's actually going to do two things. Now, it's not going to change the console output. Console output's going to stay. You've still got write to console. But it's going to also send it to Elasticsearch. Now, personally, being in the AWS world, because it's the best one of the cloud providers, we use CloudWatch, which is their logging provider, so we push to CloudWatch. We also push to our own Elasticsearch cluster, because that provides better information than CloudWatch does. So better than this.
Doesn't CloudWatch flatten the structured log, so it's pretty much flat text files, isn't it?
Nope.
But then you put a JSON in the middle of it, so then you can query it based on JSON. So it actually flattens it. It doesn't actually use structured logging, but then can parse the JSON out of it.
So it basically writes each log message as a JSON message into CloudWatch, which is queryable in their Insights engine.
Okay.
We don't use that side of it. We more use it for linear logging, but it can do it. So what we do is we still do it to console because when you're working on your local laptop, you want your manager to make it look like you're actually doing something. But they also use Elasticsearch, so we can do some bit of aggregation. But we also push specifically errors onto Raygun because there's a sync in there. These are all called syncs. So I don't know why syncs relate to Serilog and following a thread, but that's what they are. So there's a sync for Elasticsearch. There are probably about 50, 60 syncs in there for all these different providers. And there is one for Raygun. Now Raygun is a provider that will take the context of an error and provide aggregations on it and alerting. It will basically do correlation to say, this error looks like this error, so I'm not going to say it's a new error. So the answer is use lots of them. Like I say, I hate logs, but we do use them because they can be beneficial. But know when it's the right tool for that particular circumstance. Okay. So let's go back to that. And it always does this. It's PowerPoint. They do. They use massive Elasticsearch clusters. They recently switched away from using managed services for Elasticsearch as well. Okay. So metrics. Now, as I say, the stuff that we were talking about there with logging, it's the stuff that everybody knows. The addition there is structured logging that everybody should be doing if you are doing logging. Metrics is something you don't see as often because it's harder. It's harder to understand. It's harder to understand a use case. What they're generally used for is, as you can see there, that's the best definition I could find for metrics. And I think that gives you an idea of where these things come from. They're business things. It comes from the business dictionary is the best definition I could find. Because they're about numbers and about the progress and how are you reacting to it. It's not a great idea. It's not a great message for what metrics are, because they are useful. So what are metrics? In the same way as we were talking about logs, numbers. These are numbers. They're not meant to be human readable. They are numbers. They're all numbers. But they're aggregates of numbers. They're rolled up. They're also time-based. They're meant to be something over time. So number of requests to an endpoint over a particular period of time. And they're optimized for aggregation. So the tools that build these are optimized to basically lose cardinality. They're built to lose individual requests and roll them up so they can store massive amounts of data and provide you with trends. So some of the metrics that you've probably seen in the past, hits per second, transactions per day, all that kind of stuff, are metrics. There's lots of tools out there that are doing this in the development space. So OpenTSB, TSDB, Graphite, and InfluxDB are both push-based mechanisms. And what that means is you've got to push your data into them. So if you've got something, you flush it every minute and say, here's my data, here's my data, here's my data. Prometheus, that's the differentiator. So differentiator means they do pull. So they use pull or scrape methodologies, so it's all about scrape configs. So they go and grab their metrics from an endpoint. So you expose a particular endpoint that puts things in a particular way, and Prometheus will, on a regular basis, go and grab that information from it. Now, it's an important differentiator because that is very big in the microservices world, because it's all about service discovery. So the ability to go and find all of these services is quite important. So that scrape gives you that ability to do it. Now, none of those 4 tools at the top provide really any graphing. There is some, but it's not great. The bottom one, that's what gives you all the pretty things, which is Grafana. And pretty much whenever you see graphs anywhere right now, it is going to be Grafana. That is the de facto standard. Now, the reason why metrics are becoming more important is because in the old world, by old world I mean like a couple of years ago, you had these sort of things. So these are event counters in the old Windows world, and they were all over the place. They were baked into the .NET framework. All of these things allowed big tooling to come in and go, well, I know what all of the names of these things are. I can provide some pretty graphs, and that will make your management team happy. They don't provide any information, but they will make your management team happy because they'll see pretty colors and pie charts and that kind of stuff. The problem is that doesn't exist anymore because we're cross-platform, and that's Windows. So you can't have that when you're running on Linux, when you're running on Macs. You can't have it. So AppMetrics has stepped into the fray. There was metrics.net. I should really remove that. I don't think anybody uses that anymore. So AppMetrics has stepped in to provide that gap. And it's easy. It's very similar to what we saw in the last one. A little bit of coding you start up, inject it into your class, and wrap some stuff. It's that easy. And again, with this, you don't have to, when you're writing your code, all you need to know is you're going to use AppMetrics. It is a bit of a problem, and Microsoft have gone backwards and forwards a few times on an iMetrics interface for .NET. There is, I think it's about 1,500 posts on GitHub about why they shouldn't do it. But it was a very contentious issue as to whether they should add an iMetrics interface or not. But add your iMetrics, but you don't need to know where you're going to push it. Now, for the demo, I'm going to use InfluxDB, but you didn't need to know that when I was doing all this down here. That is what's going to tell it where it's going to go. But again, easy plumbing, use dependency injection. Now, I said that tools like New Relic and that kind of stuff could hook into all those metrics and provide those nice dashboards. Now, Grafana Labs does allow that kind of stuff. Now, I have Grafana Labs is you can provide JSON templates for dashboards. AppMetrics being a kind of standard tool on top of .NET, they provided this nice little use all metrics middleware, which adds a load of default metrics that mean absolutely nothing but allow you to put a dashboard up like that will make management happy. I will show you how to do that as well. So let's write some code. Let's see if I can make this work the way it should.
So metrics is different from code profiling.
Correct.
It's doing a different thing.
Yeah. So same thing. That one was in the host builder. This one's going to be in the application builder. I should probably add the references first again. Now, I'll go back to that Serilog thing. No, I'm going to have to... Sorry. It would bug me.
It's not going to kill you, Matt.
It will. It will. There's nothing complicated about what I'm adding there. And the same with the Serilog stuff. There's nothing complicated about core package, the .NET Core add-on, things to do things from configuration, and console and Elasticsearch. With this one, AppMetrics, your ASP.NET Core, the reporting, which will do all the background syncs and push things onto your destinations, and then InfluxDB, which is where we're going to post it to. There's other providers, so AWS TimeStream is a new one that's come out. There's an Application Insights one for those Azure type people. And then there's lots of other ones that you can throw in there. There is Graphite and OpenTSDB, all that kind of stuff. Okay.
Take any sort of hit on performance when you're doing this?
There is a minor hit on performance, but it's only about, so this all runs in the background. So in terms of performance of requests, no, there isn't anything. That was a problem with my snippet, that the new versions have changed the way that they report. So that's the hosted service in the background. If you ever, sorry, slight digression, but if you've ever done background tasks in a web application, you should never do them as a general rule, because if you throw an exception, it will kill your whole app pool. And if you've not come across that, it is really annoying when you come across it for the 14th time and you should have known better. But what they've done in .NET, they've got this new thing called background service. So if you create a class that is inherited from background service, you can run things in the background safely, and they will just allow you to run things in a while loop and post things in the background. It's a really cool little tool, which I found out recently when I was writing another library. So there you go. That's the config there. It's an InfluxDB that I'm running on my local host, which is why it goes in there. I'm going to call this My Metrics because, you know, I spent loads of time coming up with that name. So, and once we've done that, we're going to have to tell it to actually write some metrics that will give us pretty graphs for management. All metrics. Middle there. Not really done anything complicated. I've not changed any of my code whatsoever to do that. And again, you shouldn't see any difference whatsoever. Let's just try and get it some data in there. Okay. Now, as I say, the InfluxDB itself doesn't really provide anything that is pretty, but Grafana is our querying tool. And this is a proper developer tool. The way you know that is because it's got a black background. So we need to add a data source, and we're going to add InfluxDB.
Martin, what is
InfluxDB is purely a time series database. All it does is, it's like SQL Server but better, which isn't really hard. So it's time series based. It's a database that is built to store aggregate information over a time period. It is specifically designed to store that kind of stuff at high levels of queryability, performance, but it is only about numbers. You're not going to be able to store an order in there and bring it back. That's not what it's built for.
So it's not like a document DB or anything like that. It's just for this stuff.
Just for metric style data. Now there is, for those people who are into Postgres, there is an add-on for Postgres that came out about 6 months ago that basically builds a time series style database on top of Postgres. I've not played with it, but it is for if you're into Postgres and that kind of stuff, if you're into things like Martin and all that kind of stuff, then have a look at it. It does look pretty cool. So set up my connection. Ignore the numbers, they are just what they are. And okay, and we're going to import a dashboard. This is from Grafana Labs. One of the really cool things about the way that Grafana and Grafana Labs work is that if you want to pull off a dashboard that somebody else has created, so if they've created the library that's going to push things into your destination database, they've probably built some kind of dashboard on the top of it, put it into Grafana Labs, and you can literally just import it by the ID. like that, and et voila, funky graphs. Not a lot of code. No applause. All right, fair enough. But there's not a lot of code there, and we've literally just run up a few lines of code and got some interesting-ish graphs. Now on a production system, that's probably going to be full of data. You run this in production, it will work. But I would advise that you start using things like an InfluxDB Cloud, which is a commercial solution on top of InfluxDB, or TimeStream, or Application Insights, or something else that you can push this stuff into. There are providers to push all those into. Again, it is not exactly complicated code. But make sure you tell anybody that it is really complicated and you spent a lot of time on doing it, because it does look like it should be complicated, so you can probably get away with it. So that's the defaults that you get. But what we would want to do is add some extra context to this. Just saying when a request, a get, a post, by endpoint, what are my transaction rates, you can get that from other tools. What this provides is a little bit extra. So for a few lines of code in your controller or class, it doesn't have to be a controller. You can start to get even more information. Again, dependency injection, everybody should be using it. So if I add myself a counter, just like that. And let's add ourselves an action. So what I've done there is, that's a little bit too big. I don't think anybody's going to see that. So all I've done is I've added a different action onto the controller that's going to create some metrics tags. So when we're creating metrics and pushing them in, we add tags around them, which will allow us to add it to the main metric, but also then add it to the tag of that metric as well. So it'll add it to, in this case, the home counter. But what that's doing under the hood is adding, incrementing the home counter, but it's also internally adding it to home counter with the tag, whatever we pass in as well. So that's going to provide us with the ability to segregate that, group by, provide different series on a graph, that kind of stuff. So not a lot of code there. There are differing tools. So this one is an increment. So this is just going to increment a counter internally. There are other tools that allow you to measure something over time. So add yourself a using statement around a third-party API call, throw that in as a metric, and it will push that out into a different place. There is some conventions. I encourage you to have a look at the app metrics documentation, because they do have conventions around where you should store your register of your metrics and this kind of stuff. But it is as simple as that. That will work. That will give you the ability to do what we're wanting to do here. So if I So let's just throw a lot of data in there. Now create a new dashboard. It's fairly mundane. I'm going to add a graph panel onto there off our Influx database source. And what you can see there, application home counter. That's the one that we've just created in our code. our home counter. And what we want, if I do that home counter, you can see there is some data there, which is not going to work for some reason. And what I can do is I can limit it by my user tag. Now at the moment there's no user tags there. It's doing querying in the background to work out what's there. But if I was to add on the end, tag equals Leeds sharp is awesome.
Trying to make friends now.
If I do that now, it's noticed that we've pushed in some metrics with Leeds sharp is awesome. Unfortunately, it's coming back with no data. That's bad.
And now you're going to suggest we should do all this in production.
Oh, that's where we sample this, isn't it?
So there's various different tooling that you can throw on there, but it does provide some very interesting information that you can see. It's not hard to do. The thing I'm trying to get across here is it's not hard to add things like login, things like metrics to your application. It's a few lines of code. If you're running in .NET Core, you can throw things up there. You need a service to put it, but most people will either have somewhere they can put it in Azure, somewhere they can put it in AWS. Rackspace has its own offerings. If you're working in the cloud, you've got somewhere that you can put it to already. The metrics is a little bit more tough, and it is a bigger sell because it is something that you need to provide a service for. But logging isn't. Hopefully, metrics is going to come a little bit more commonplace. But there you go. Data's in. And I can't get close enough to the end, that's why. But there is some data there. And that allows us to do things like group by, so I can be able to see two different series. So I'm going to remove that. With little bits of data, it's not as easy to start seeing things. But you can see there that we've got two different data series, one for the undefined and one for Leeds is awesome. Apparently Leeds is awesome isn't winning at the moment, so you know what. Right. Leeds is awesome should win now. Cool. So that's metrics. There's lots of things that you can do with it. There's lots of lots of different controls. You can add various different things to Grafana. You can use Grafana to build things off Elasticsearch, to build things off your login. You can use Grafana to go onto multiple different data sources. Where I was going into in here to add new data sources, those are just the built-in data sources that are there. So building things off CloudWatch, building things off Elasticsearch, off all those different ones.
Have you got like a recent use case where you like gone in and said, wow, that's shit, let's fix that?
So I will show you something here. Now you may remember quite recently that there was a bit of snow over in Manchester. And working where I work, I believe it was Wednesday. This is the sort of data that you can get off these sort of systems, because we've spent a lot of time on building these things out. You can't actually see the web CPU because the servers have cycled since then. But this is a combination of data that we're bringing in from different things like CloudWatch, which is metrics within AWS. There are some stuff that we're bringing in around app metrics. There's some stuff that we're pulling in from load balancer logs, some other stuff from various different places. So these are off Elasticsearch, and we're combining them all in one dashboard using Grafana. So all these things that I've been talking about with logging and metrics, they're all built off this same thing. So those are all off Serilog style information. That one there is off the CloudWatch metrics. Now this was when the snow happened, because that's the hits at Manchester Airport's website. And that is people furiously, is my flight coming, is my flight coming, is my flight? No, the airport's closed, but they still click. And this is the sort of thing that you can start to gain. Now you can see here, these are the actual response times of the pages that were coming back. Now we can actually see from here that that isn't the same, it's not going up exactly with the hits. But we're bringing this out from the metrics. This is going right into the ASP.NET core level. We're not taking it from load balancer logs. We're not taking it from that side. This is a different layer that we're actually instrumenting. So as most consultants would say, when they say which one should we use, all of them, or it depends. And it depends on the use case. So do all of them.
The app metrics thing, as standard, what stuff does that log? Because you just added that and then you were getting metrics.
Yep.
What does that give you? Does it give you broken down by controller and action and that sort of stuff, or is it more generic than that?
It gives you stuff. I would never recommend using that in production.
Yeah, okay.
That is normally there for the idea of get something up and running, get to the whole idea of a walking skeleton, if you're familiar with that concept. So get yourself a default web app built, get yourself logging, metrics, instrumentation, get yourself the build pipelines up and running. So you can just throw in use metrics or logging and you'll be able to see some get requests and that kind of stuff on there. That's mainly what it's used for. I have seen people run it in production. I know there's at least one of our applications that is using it in production. But it doesn't provide that the level of information because you're not being specific about what you're doing. And that's what a lot of these tools are about now. It's about being specific about what you want to log. In the olden worlds where you basically get an APM tool or something like that, throw it at your server and just go, can you tell me what's wrong? And it'd use things like the performance counters in .NET and the underlying Windows frameworks to basically tell you what the queue length is in IIS, what the requests that are coming in at, what's the CPU, that memory, that kind of stuff. Because it was standard back then. What we're saying now with things like metrics and logging is be more specific, be deliberate about what you're trying to log. You know your code better than any tool would know that code. If you've got third-party API calls that you're trying to run, then log them in the way that they're meant to log. Log them and provide tags on the sorts of information that they're doing. One of the big examples that we use this for is, so my industry, as I'll go into in the next demo, is parking. We do parking for the airport. It is a very big thing for us. It's a very high volume system. Now, when we're doing app metrics, one of the things that we've added is a tag against these metrics that say the duration of that car parking. Because that's a key metric that tells us the load on the database. Because of the way that we calculate pricing, the bigger the duration, the more load on the database. Don't break our database by doing 2,000 days, please. I can see those graphs going up in a minute. But it's a key metric, and that isn't something an APM tool would be able to tell you. You know your code better than they do. So be deliberate about what you're trying to log. And what I'm trying to get across here is to add that skeleton bit at the start isn't hard. So that if you just wanted one bit of information, add that skeleton up front, and then just inject your metrics down the end and go, all right, I'm just going to load this one thing over here. It's not like I've got to do a big instrumentation framework. I've not got to purchase app metrics. I've not got to purchase New Relic to do this because, you know, not everybody can sign off the first bomb.
So do you have like meetings that you decide, right guys, we need to well stuff around this a little bit, see what's going on with it?
So that does bring me into the last one of these tools, which is around eventing and tracing. And the observability movement, and if you follow people like Charity Majors on Twitter, you will have seen some of the things that are getting quite big in the industry at the moment, which is service ownership or platform ownership. Because if you don't know what your platform is doing, if you're owning that platform as an individual, if you don't own that platform in production, if you don't know what that platform is doing, how are you going to improve it? You need to know these things. And And I'm not talking about the management team need to know this so that they can come in and go, oh, look at this. We need to sort this graph out here. This is about you knowing what your application is doing in production. And that's something that's really lost at the moment, where the whole DevOps movement is meant to bring people together. But what it basically did is create DevOps engineers, which are basically infrastructure engineers that are paid a bit more. So that's what that movement has done. It's not brought those two closer together to make tools like this that you see in here, and make tools like AppMetrics and the honeycomb type tools that we're going to talk about in the third part of this. It's not made that a reality, because people still throw it over and they hand it over to the ops team. Can you go and deploy that for me? I don't deal with production. On call, paid too much for that. But the idea is that the question that you ask around, do we have meetings? No, we don't. What we have is platform owners. The platform owners own their own metrics. They own that system in general, so it's up to them to decide if that's a problem. Now that, I can deal with a 250 millisecond response time when our response rates are 60,000 requests every 5 minutes. I can deal with that, because if you look at normal response times, it's 50 milliseconds. I can deal with that. It's up to that person who owns that platform to work out whether they can. Now, it might be an indicator for them to go and look at something and say, is this potentially a problem? It doesn't point to a problem, but it might be an indicator for one. Giving developers the tools to be able to monitor production is vitally important. It's not about giving people the debugging tools to do it locally. Now, the last part of this is events and tracing. Now, when we start talking about distributed systems, so the reason why things like logging doesn't work is when you're talking about a distributed system with 40 different servers, with 10 different microservices that exist within those clusters, and you've got a request that's going through all of these different things, just doing a log line saying, he requested this at this time, doesn't provide any ability to be able to log this and any observability around it. So Honeycomb is a company that have tried to build better tools. And in the same way as there's a tool called VictorOps, if anybody has seen that, whose slogan is "Make on-call suck less," which is one of the best slogans I've ever heard. Their whole idea is about being able to debug things in production. Now, if I was to ask you, what is the best way that you can think, if you had your way, if you wanted to debug something in production, what would be the best way to do it? I've asked that question of quite a lot of people. And the general response is, well, I want to attach Visual Studio to production. And I want to trace it through. Now, has anybody actually done that? Good. You haven't gone through the pain of realizing that you're actually blocking every single web request when you do that. But that is the best way to debug. Attach Visual Studio, step through the code, work out all the different data. What was this object like at this particular point? What was this object like at this particular point? And you trace through on an individual request. Now, if you've ever tried to do that on Visual Studio, you'll know that when another request comes in and you've got threads jumping around and you go step, it moves on to the next thread of the next request and you're like, whoa, what's going on? So you don't get that ability to debug in production. Now, what you've got to try and do is get as close to that as you can. And what Honeycomb tries to do is get us as close there as possible. Now, their mantra is around high cardinality. Now, by high cardinality, it's basically add every little bit of information, all that debug information that you would have, add it all. Now, if you were to do that with logs, you'd see people in Splunk going, whoo, we're going to be rich. Because it costs a lot to store that data. Now, the way they combat that is it's also about low retention. If you're debugging a production issue, do I care all of that information is available from last year? No. I mean, has anybody looked at logs from about a year ago? No? Does everybody store logs for over a year? No?
Does anyone have money to store it for over a year?
But people don't I mean, you talk about the tools that we're talking about with Datadog and logs.io, the default retention policies are 12 to 18 months. That's the default retention policy for these log files. Now, if I started adding a meg of data or even 50k of data for every single request that came through the system, then I'd be running out of my storage very, very quickly. So what they combat this with is low retention, because if you're trying to debug in production, this isn't a metrics tool. So the app metric stuff that we do, you will go back over time because it's meant to store big bits of data over lots of periods of time. But they store raw data, high cardinality at low retention. Now they store that in the idea of an event or a context. Now in web applications, it's easy. It's a request, a HTTP request. That is your context. It's got some data that identifies it, trace identifier. So if you're running on Azure or AWS with a load balancer in front, you've probably got a trace ID that comes through that's all about the open tracing protocols and that kind of stuff. If you're running on local, there's already a trace identifier that's added with .NET Core that's added to every request. You've also then got your path, you've got your action, you've got your controller, you've got all this interesting information around it. Now what you should then do is add every other bit of information you can think of. Our example at the start was person X has done it with these parameters. Let's add person X to the context. Not their name and their address because that would be GDPR. But add their ID so that you can then later on down the line try and group by that information. Add the request parameters that they sent in. Now in the context of parking, it's things like the duration, the start date that they did it. But it's very deliberate what you're doing. What you're trying to do is, as this request comes in, I'm going to just tack more information onto it. More information that's available. I'm not worried about in its document schema, the document DB type methodology. I don't care whether it exists or doesn't exist on different requests. I'm just going to add more data into it because I don't know whether I'm going to need it. So what when I came to this, there wasn't a .NET library, and this is a shameless plug because I did build a Honeycomb library. You'll notice that it is very similar to the previous two that we've looked at. I copied a lot of the code. It's all MIT licensed. I didn't steal anything. It was completely valid. But add Honeycomb, use Honeycomb, and then add your events in there. So you can see at the bottom there, the idea is you've got your event manager. That's going to hook into the event that's for that particular request, and it's going to add something on there. It's going to add the number of values that were sent in. It's going to add the date. It's going to add numerous other bits to that event. Now, one of the key things here is if you do that with metrics, and you can do this with metrics, it aggregates that information. You can't get back to that individual thing. If you try and basically tag absolutely everything, then your data structure is going to get really, really big. And AppMetrics or InfluxDB will grind to a halt if you've got lots and lots of tags. If you want to slice that data in lots and lots of different ways. The idea of Honeycomb is that you don't do that. It stores all the raw data and allows you to query it incredibly fast. It actually came off the back of a tool called Scuba, which is a tool that Facebook use because the founders of Honeycomb are ex-Facebook people who built Scuba. So honeycomb.io is the website. There are stickers, if anybody wants stickers. So we're going to add Honeycomb to this. Again, same solution, not that much magic. And this is the part of the demo that I have done once before. It did work. Honest. I'm trying to work out whether it works first. Okay. Honest. I didn't forget to switch the screens. Honest. Yeah. So it's in pre-release at the moment. I do advise you to have a look. They have a free tariff as well, and it's very generous. So added that in. So we've got our Honeycomb ASP.NET Core. And again, really, really tough. Now, the one thing I've got to work out now is team ID. So I'm not passing in really much complicated information here. There is a team ID that I need to pass in. So and what I'm going to do is grab it from there. Woo. You know what? Let's just be a little bit lazy. So, as the library is new, there's not a huge amount of settings on it yet. Right. That's it basically to make this run. Again, not complicated. Let's just run some requests, and that's and what you should start to see quite quickly is some data in there. Now, you look at that, and obviously everybody can see exactly what that says, but it's just a data table. It doesn't really seem like it's much. You know, you could log that out in a database and be able to do it really quickly. The power comes with, obviously, and the power with a lot of things is being able to add in a lot of aggregates and things like that. So you run something like that and get our average duration, and then be able to drop it down by path, for instance. Now, on a simple website like that, it doesn't really seem like that's adding much value. But you can see how we've got that information in there. It's relatively easy to get it in. And to add more information to it, what you'll see on this example here, that's as easy as it is to add that in there. Add it into your iEvent manager, so it is unit testable and all that kind of stuff, and add some values to it. Now, in a controller like that, it doesn't really make sense to what you're doing. But imagine that this thing here is an API call. So it's actually making an API call off to a third-party service. Let's wrap that in a stopwatch and work out how that third-party service, how much that third-party service took. Say you've got 3 different third-party services that you're actually calling. Let's wrap those and put that information out there. Because it could just be one under a particular circumstance. So we're starting to get some quite complex debugging scenarios. Now, I haven't actually got time to run all of those. So what I will do is Honeycomb themselves had an outage, and they do dog food their software, which apparently is not a used term, according to John we were talking before. But they use Honeycomb themselves to instrument their own software. Now what they've done is they've made that data set for that time period available for people to have a look at. And to be able to look at and find whether they believe that information is available in Honeycomb. Now this is searching, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's hundreds of gigabytes of data. Incredibly fast. Now this is where things become quite interesting, but it's more about when you're running things at scale. So if you're looking at this and going, I can't really see why I'd use this, then start to think about when your particular product or your business scales to thousands of requests, 60,000 requests a minute. Because that's when these things become hard to use logs and metrics to identify individual issues. That's them going back, and then you can add lots and lots of different filters and things like that. So it's play.honeycomb.io, and you can go and play around with their pre-built data sets and see what you can see as the power of doing that. But when you start working at scale, you start needing this idea of being able to do this. I'm trying to remember which one it was that shows you exactly what the error was. But the key is they didn't know what they were looking for before they did this. Before they added all of this data in, they didn't know what they were looking for. But this allowed them to go back and see what the actual error was. And it was to do with string lengths. It's the spoiler. But you can find that out. So they do go into a little bit more, and when we talk about events, the reason why they're starting to get more complicated and starting to get bigger is microservices, because it starts to now think about tracing and the idea that a particular event can actually involve lots and lots of different services as they go. So a particular request could go through 5 or 6 different microservices. Each of those has its own metrics that go around it, and you want to be able to provide some level of ability to debug that. And Honeycomb is at the forefront of that. They have also a tool, if I can get back to it, around their tracing. So but the idea of being able to trace individual requests, so a particular span, how much did that make up of a particular request? That in itself is a probably 2-3 hour talk around tracing and distributed tracing. I'm not going to even attempt that. But what I would say is it's tools like these that once you've started instrumenting and you can start adding this data on, that it starts to become easier and easier as you get scale up in these environments. That's me. That's logging, metrics, tracing and events. If you come up with a better term for those, do let people know, because nobody's really come up with something that makes sense. Because if you Google events, it does not come back with what you think it should. I'm around. I will be in the pub after if people want to talk and argue, because I love that, apparently. So thank you very much.